let's just start with that question. Where do our desires come from? I mean, really think about it. The last thing you just had to have, that new phone, that specific coffee, even a political belief you feel really strongly about, where did that feeling, that certainty, actually start? Well, the book we're going to explore together today tackles that exact question. And even though it was written almost 100 years ago, it feels like it could have been published just yesterday. We're talking about Edward Bernays' 1928 classic, Propaganda. It's a really slim book, but it is packed with some massive and, let's be honest, pretty unsettling ideas. So let's just dive right into the beginning. Bernays kicks things off not with a solution, but with a diagnosis. He looks at modern democratic life and sees one central problem. He just calls it chaos. And here it is. This is literally on the first page. It's the kind of sentence that just stops you cold. He isn't burying his main point at all. He's just putting it right out there. He's arguing that for a democracy to even work, someone has to be intelligently manipulating what the public thinks. I know, it's a shocking idea. But to get where he's coming from, we kind of have to see the world through his eyes. See, for Bernays, this whole idea of the public was basically a fantasy. What he saw instead was society fracturing into thousands and thousands of different little groups, each one with its own leaders, its own newsletters, its own very narrow interests, all pulling in completely different directions. And to him, this wasn't healthy diversity. No, it was a dangerous, chaotic mess. And get this, these are his own examples straight from the book, which I just find fascinating. He lists them out to show you just how specific and frankly how absurd all these competing groups were. You've got the Fox Breeders Association, the Hotel Greeters, and my personal favorite has got to be the National Nut News. His point is really clear. This isn't some unified public, it's a splintered, noisy crowd all clamoring for attention. So this is the question that just naturally pops out from his diagnosis, right? If democracy is nothing more than thousands of groups like the pickle packers and the trap shooters all yelling at the same time, how does anything ever get done? I mean, how do we form any kind of coherent direction? And that leads us straight to Bernays' answer. He argued that order is brought about by a small, intelligent minority, a group that understands how to guide the masses. He had a name for them, the invisible government. In his mind, these people are the true ruling power of our country. And they're not necessarily the politicians we elect. Nope. They're the ones who really understand the psychology, the social patterns of the masses, and they know how to pull the levers that guide what we all think. It sounds so conspiratorial, doesn't it? But for Bernays, this was just a practical necessity. He even gives us a list of who these folks might be. You've got the obvious ones, right? Presidents of big corporations, powerful editors. But then he adds this last little point, and it's so crucial. He says a lot of these visible leaders are themselves being guided by people we never even see. The true public relations pros, the strategists working behind the curtain. Okay, so how does this invisible government actually do its work? Well, this brings us to the real core of Bernays' technique, something he later called the engineering of consent. And this quote just nails his core psychological insight, which, by the way, he borrowed a lot of from his uncle, Sigmund Freud. Bernays was convinced that people make decisions based on unconscious desires and hidden feelings, not logic. We might think we're buying a car because of its great mileage, but maybe we're really buying it because our neighbor has one, or because it makes us feel successful. And if that's true, it means propaganda shouldn't try to appeal to our reason. It has to appeal to those hidden motives. So Bernays lays out this really sharp contrast. The old way of selling stuff was super direct. You want to sell bacon, you run an ad that says, eat more bacon. It's good for you. But the new way, Bernays' way, is so much more subtle. Instead of telling people to go buy a piano, you create the desire for a music room in their home. You link it to culture, to family. You get famous architects to start designing homes with music rooms. Pretty soon, people feel like they need a music room. And what goes in a music room? A piano. They end up thinking it was their idea all along, which is way more powerful. And look, this wasn't just some abstract theory for Bernays. He actually put these ideas into practice in some of the most famous marketing campaigns of the entire 20th century. Okay, let's take his work for Ivory soap. The problem was simple. Soap is, well, it's boring. So he didn't try to sell soap. He created a whole event. He got a famous sculptor to say that ivory was a great material for carving. Then he launched a national soap sculpture competition just for kids. He even got it sponsored by a major art center to make it seem legitimate. And just like that, schools were holding contests, kids were carving soap at home, and moms were saving the little shavings for laundry.
I mean, what's so genius about this is that he wasn't just moving a product off a shelf. He was tapping into this whole web of human desires. That competitive spirit in kids, the need for artistic expression, a mother's pride in seeing her kids create something. He completely transformed a boring bar of soap from a simple cleaning product into this wholesome, creative family activity. It's just absolutely brilliant. So now we really have to ask ourselves, what's the legacy of all of these ideas? Bernays wrote this back in 1928, but man, his shadow just looms so large over our world today.
So, check out this number. According to a Pew Research report from 2022, this is the percentage of Americans who say they trust the government to do what's right just about always or most of the time. 20%. Now, of course, we can't draw a perfect straight line from Bernays to this number, but it really gives you something to think about, doesn't it? In a world that's been shaped by the conscious and intelligent manipulation of opinion for a century, is it really any surprise that people have become so deeply skeptical of, well, pretty much everything? Because his methods are absolutely everywhere. When you see a political campaign trying to discredit a news source so they can push their own experts, that's creating a new authority. When a social media algorithm pushes angry content at you because it knows anger gets more clicks, that is tapping into what Bernays called the herd point of view. His playbook is still very, very much in use. And all of this leaves us with some big things to chew on. Here's one for us to talk about. When we choose a brand of shoes or a car, not just for what it does, but for what it says about us, its image, its coolness, aren't we basically the exact consumer Bernays was describing, motivated by symbols we've been taught to want? And maybe this is the most important question of all. Bernays himself would argue that propaganda could be used for good things, to promote public health or education. But where's the line? Is there really a meaningful difference between educating people and engineering their consent? It's really the essential question his work leaves us with. Because an idea, once it's planted, it's a very difficult thing to trace all the way back to its source.